Hi there, I'm Rhonda Lauritzen, and ancestor stories have been on my mind, maybe even more than usual this week. That's saying something. But I got a tip from a niece to go check out something in our family tree. And I put client work on hold for a minute so that I could spend some time on my own ancestor stories. Sometimes it's a case of the cobbler's kids don't have shoes, working on other people's stories, and I don't always spend as much time as I'd like on my own. So I really indulged in going down a rabbit hole, and I am so glad I did because of what I found. So my niece had mentioned that there was an interesting story in our matrilineal line, meaning mother to mother to mother. And I before I did this research, I'm a little embarrassed to say that I never really explored that line specifically. I mean, I've explored many branches and people on that line for sure, but I'd never taken it as far as it would go. And I also didn't really realize until I did a little research this last week the power of matrilineal lines and patrilineal lines. And here's what I learned. This is like the sort of lay version because I am not a DNA expert. But matrilineal lines are important because they carry the mitochondrial DNA, and patrilineal lines carry the Y chromosome. And what this means is that the DNA stays more intact than in a lot of the sort of hodgepodge of all the gazillions of ancestors in between. You can track those two types of lines back further. I mean, you can track them back because they remain more unchanged, and you can tell relationships better based on those lines. And I also suspect that the traits we pick up, whether it's by the gene pool or by teaching from mother to daughter or father to son. Of course, we learn, if you're a female, learn from your dads too, but you get my point. There are things that are passed down on those lines that may make them an interesting place to start. So I followed my mother's line back, and I got to see on a paper 400 years of mothers. It was a feeling, to realize that I'm the next mother in that line. I'm now the matriarch of my own family, in that I'm the only female of my generation. I have 6 amazing, strong brothers, but I'm the female. And my daughter is the one who carries that line on. And I wonder if there's something about this discovery that led me to that realization. But there's more. Okay, so my niece had told me there was an interesting story there, and I went back looking, and I did find the interesting story. That's for another day, and it is fascinating. But what I also learned was that I've unwittingly been tracking the places of these mothers my whole life. Well, since I was 16. I didn't know that I had ancestors from New England. Like, I just didn't know. I should have known, but didn't. And my brother and I ended up, when I was 16 years old, on this trip to New England. I won't get into the details, but we were there and our plans got canceled. And so we found ourselves with some time on our hands. And the only plans we had were that we were going to end up, we had a half price hotel deal, basically, in Plymouth and in Haverhill. So Plymouth below Boston, and Haverhill, we spent time in Boston too. But so we woke up Thanksgiving morning of all days in Plymouth. And then we drove up the coast to Haverhill, which is on the border of New Hampshire, this kind of smaller community. And we didn't, like I said, no plans about where we wanted to go. We just sort of went the direction of our whim. And turns out that the direction of our whim followed the path of these mothers and where they lived in Massachusetts. We ended up stopped in Salem, ended up in Haverhill, which is the very first community where the first mother that we can track landed in 1635, about 15 years after the Mayflower. And I'll tell you what is maybe even more remarkable. I mean, that could be coincidence, right? And all of this could be coincidence. But my brother and I kept talking about how we felt something there. And we thought at the time that it was maybe just American history, that we were lit up by the history of our country and our collective story. And that's important too. I mean, I guess I've always loved history, but I tell you what, those woods, I felt something old and deep, and I didn't know what it was until last week. I didn't. And I guess I never will know for sure, maybe until I'm on the other side and figure out how this stuff works or not. I can only guess and believe, but I'll tell you, I have pictures here a minute ago and then I set them down. I'm back. We stopped at random cemeteries because they looked cool. And we walked through these cemeteries and looked at headstones. Who does that when you're 16 years old? Apparently my brother and I. And we took these pictures, of our ancestors' places. That's me in the green coat. So anyway, I feel like maybe I was drawn to that place. We were drawn to that place without knowing why. And then fast forward, I end up in this work professionally, and I was just barely getting into this work. I was kind of a new researcher, completely unknown, and at random got called to work on a couple of history projects and ended up working on Pioneer Park, the history of the old fort, and the Ephraim Relief Society granary. And also while I was there, ended up doing research on the Spring City Relief Society granary. And I learned those were the next stops on the journey of my mother's. And the only one of my ancestors that I know who lived in the old fort was these mothers, and then the Springs, and then Ephraim, and then Spring City. So it just makes me wonder, what am I meant to learn? And what are you meant to learn as you discover your own ancestors and their stories and what is within you? I think there are so many things that are just waiting, and people who are waiting by name to be known to us. So what I have to accomplish or to show for the time that I spent on my own stuff and not doing work for a living was that I can now name 13 mothers in a row without looking at the chart. I know their names and I know a little bit about their history, and that has changed me in some ways. And I know that this work has a tendency to change all of us. So keep up the good work, whatever you're doing with your research or your family history projects. And I'll see you in the next time. Over and out.